So let's look at the single European market, what could be considered a significant British achievement. Mrs. Thatcher fought for this within the EU, and it was adopted by 1993, and what it provides is free movement of goods, services, capital and people within the 28 countries of the EU. To enable this to happen, it eliminates non-tariff barriers, which are different product standards within different countries, which are significant barriers to trade. So for example, if we export, say, a Jaguar from the UK to France, if there are different product standards, such as different standards regarding the brakes, other health and safety issues, then we'd have to modify that car, and then that would be an additional cost and therefore a significant barrier to trade. So what's terrific is the EU has replaced national product standards with EU-wide product standards, creating one level playing field and one single market, which means it encourages competition, so more firms are competing across that market, and also economies of scale. Firms can grow bigger because they're not restricted to a national market, and they can't monopolise a national market because they have to compete with other firms within the EU. This has huge benefits for the consumer because it means that firms, through competition, won't make monopoly profits. They'll become more efficient, they'll become more dynamically efficient in the long run and invest in new products, and also they'll become more price competitive. Think of the open skies policy within the EU, with airlines such as Ryanair offering very cheap flights, which is a vast improvement on the bilateral arrangements that took place before, where free trade was restricted, and you maybe have two airlines operating, say, between Rome and London, stitching up a nice deal, high prices, large profits. So the EU has terrific benefits in terms of economic growth as a result of a single market. Okay, so if we look at what's happened to the UK since we joined the single market, our output has increased 62% since '93. France's by 42% and Germany's by 35%. So trade has probably doubled, according to many estimates, as a result of the single market within the EU. Now, admittedly, there are taxes on imports into that single market because it's a customs union, and that is a form of trade diversion. We lose out there. But the gains are far significant from those losses. 45% of our exports go to the EU. Over 3 million jobs are in those exporting industries. And we'll come back to that shortly. And undoubtedly, people argue that non-EU trade has grown. This is what Boris Johnson would say. And it's bound to grow because we're exporting successfully as a part of the EU to non-EU countries, which are growing at a really quick rate. Recently, China was growing at over 10%. Now it's more like 6% per year. And so naturally, we're going to export more to those countries. So the EU does not stop Germany and Britain exporting to non-EU countries. In fact, what's particularly important is the EU, being a bloc of 28 countries, has huge power in terms of negotiating trade deals. And as President Obama quite rightly says, a smaller country like Britain alone would go to the back of the queue. So if we leave the single market, what's going to happen? There's going to be a huge moment of uncertainty which will stretch out for some time, because are we going to go for a Norwegian option? That has been ruled out. That's when we stay in the single market and we accept a lot of the rules, including free movement of people and the contribution to the EU budget. If we attempt a Swiss situation where we have limited access to the single market and we don't pay full tariffs, okay, that took 10 years to negotiate. That's a long period of uncertainty. However, what the German finance minister said, and many people who want to leave the EU state, is they basically want a Canadian situation, or some say we're going to go basically back to WTO rules, which means that we face 10% tariffs to import into the EU. So this period of uncertainty regarding our exports will have a huge effect on the UK economy, particularly in the short run, but also in the long run, because it takes years to sign trade deals, unless we just rely on the WTO rules. Now, some economists, such as Patrick Minford, argue that we should accept WTO rules and not put the 10% tariffs on imports coming into the UK. So we'll pay 10% when we export, say, to France and Germany, but get rid of those tariff barriers for imports to the UK. The effect of that was probably, and even he admits that, to destroy much of our manufacturing industry. Okay, so let's be realistic and say we might have WTO rules for the next few years, and we might be able to negotiate something over time with the EU, but it could take 5 to 10 years. So what's going to happen in the meantime? There'll be a fall in exports, okay? There'll be a fall in domestic investment by firms because of this huge uncertainty. Foreign direct investment into the UK will fall significantly. Why be like Nissan and invest 3.6 billion, creating thousands of jobs in the northeast, if we're not going to be in the single market? Because 79% of firms that are located in the UK from abroad state that it's because we're in the single European market that they're locating in the EU. Sorry, locating in Britain. So we've got a fall in exports, fall in investment, a significant fall in foreign direct investment, and that includes the City of London. So much as though many are sceptical about the City of London, at least it provides huge productive output for the UK financial services, about 10% of our GDP, and a large part of our exports, and we need those exports. At the moment, the UK, or London, is one of the great free financial centres of the world. Now this will probably go because we don't have the European passport, which means many transactions can't take place in London, and the big city firms such as Goldman Sachs, Citibank have stated that they will move their headquarters and much of their trading activity will move to Frankfurt or possibly Paris. So Frankfurt's rather looking forward to that probably, but that's a big loss to the UK economy. Anyhow, more significantly as well is the fall in business confidence, okay, which is partly why investment falls. And then we have a problem is already share prices have fallen. So if we look at today's newspaper here, Brexit fears rock global stock markets. So house prices also will probably fall because of the uncertainty and because of the potential increase in interest rates, which we'll come to. So that's a loss in wealth for the UK and a loss to people's pensions. And another effect that could and is likely to occur and has started occurring already is a depreciation in the pound. So the pound will lose value because of this uncertainty. Markets hate uncertainty, so why buy the pound when the UK economy is going to go through difficulties? Rather like, why invest if your profits are going to go down because your exports have gone down? So this all leads to what economists call a huge negative supply and demand side shock. In other words, there'll be a fall in supply in the economy, in potential output, because there'll be less investment, and there'll be less demand because of the uncertainty and because of the fall in household wealth, and also because of the fall in exports. So this economic shock can be illustrated in this little diagram here. We've got output here, which is GDP, and we're merrily growing. We've finally recovered from the 2008 recession, and then we have a self-inflicted recession caused by Brexit here, and therefore output falls quite significantly in the short run. Now, even people such as Boris Johnson, Nigel Farage admit that there's going to be a shortfall in output and some uncertainty. However, most economists, okay, and look at all these institutions that basically support this analysis, whether you're a right-wing economist or a left-wing economist, the IMF, the Treasury, the OECD, the LSE, Pricewaterhouse, etc., and myself included, would be very concerned that we're going to get a huge or significant fall in GDP, and then we're going to get lower growth because there'll be less investment, there'll be less increase in productivity. And we won't be able to necessarily export more to China because the EU has agreements, potentially with India and other trade agreements. We'll be at the back of the queue in terms of forming a trade agreement. So the trade agreement that might occur between the US and the EU, we will not be part of that, which is called TTIP. That has pros and cons, of course, but it's significant. So therefore we have lower growth, and what's going to occur is this gap. Instead of continuing our growth rate, okay, hopefully recovering from this referendum if people vote yes, and the growth will pick up, we'll have lower growth, and therefore we have this huge gap here occurring. And that's why the Treasury estimates that by 2030 that will be equivalent to about £4,300 per household. Now obviously that's an estimate, but if you see a storm coming, you know something bad is going to happen. And these are the things that are going to happen. There'll be a slowdown in economic growth. There's likely to be a recession. It mightn't be as severe as 2008, which was minus 7.1% of our GDP, but it could be a significant recession, and that's bound to lead to an increase in unemployment. Pricewaterhouse expects that'll be about 1 million extra unemployed people. There'll be a fiscal black hole. So this talk that the NHS will be safe if we leave the EU is very dodgy because, okay, we make a net contribution of 8 billion a year, not 30 billion, because that's the gross contribution, and it's a lie to say that it's to imply it's a net contribution. So we give 8 billion a year. So yes, we could spend that on the NHS, but because of slower economic growth, there'll be less tax revenue for the government, and the government will have to spend more on unemployment benefit. Why will there be less tax revenue? Because incomes will be growing slower, profits will be increasing at a slower rate, people will be spending increases will be growing at a slower rate, so less VAT receipts, etc. So that's why there will be a fiscal black hole occurring of about 30 billion. The IFS, a hugely respected organisation by those across the political spectrum, reckons there'll be a black hole between 20 and 40 billion. Okay, so to make up for this, we have to have cuts in the NHS. We have to have tax increases. People might have to retire later on a smaller pension. Even more hard decisions will have to be made, and they will be self-inflicted. So clearly, there's a danger of recession. It could be a prolonged recession, or we have prolonged uncertainty about what's going to occur, and then obviously standard of living will suffer. So overall, the single European market has huge potential for the UK. If we develop a deepening of the single market in services, that plays to the UK economy's strengths. We are good at services, we're good at exporting in the creative industries, law, management consultancy, yes, education. So that has a huge potential for the UK economy, and we need to be in the EU and in the single market fighting for a truly single European market in services, because it's work in progress. It's not complete yet, but we've made great progress in terms of single market. So you can see the effects of leaving the EU on a macroeconomic basis are very significant, worth thinking about. Thank you.